I gave a talk to a group of industrialists because I was working with the American Management Association talking to corporate executives on creativity. And I had a large audience in Houston, Texas, and I would usually go through my regular routine of creativity, thinking out of the box, and et cetera, and et cetera. More of a workshop on a material level. And I remember that night before that talk, Bobby said, why don't you mention to this group of industrialists that if they can become quiet and go within, they can tap into a universal intelligence and they can get their directions on how to run their corporations from a different level of consciousness. And I said, Bobby, they'll laugh me off the podium. She said, just try it. And so that morning, I was the keynote speaker of that group. I got up there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I did. I built that whole discussion on becoming quiet, going within, tapping that inner intuitiveness, and from that level, allowing our corporation structure to flow from that level. And to my amazement, I got a standing ovation. Now, these were the leaders in the corporate world. And the offshoot of that, the Weyerhaeuser Corporation contacted us, and they said our vice president in charge of research and development heard something we've never heard before, and that was called become quiet and go within and tap into a universal intelligence. And they said we would like to know more about that. And so we flew out to Tacoma, Washington, to their huge headquarters. And they confided with us that they said, we've been in a very innovative company, we've plateaued out and we can't break it. We hire consultants, we hire PhDs, we've done everything we know of, and we're at a standstill, we don't know what to do. And they said, no, you're talking about becoming quiet, going within, tapping into some state of consciousness beyond what we are aware of, and making our decisions from that level. And I said, yes, that's what we're talking about. Then they said to me, do you know any corporate executive of any major company that's doing that? Now, I was talking to their board of directors, and I said, yes, I have some of my clients were of that caliber. They said, could you put together an advisory board? And they said, what are we going to call this? And Bobby said, well, maybe call it a spiritual advisory board. But she said, bear in mind, it's got nothing. She was the only female in this meeting. But she said, bear in mind, it's got nothing to do with religion now. Called a spiritual advisory board. And so they asked me if I would put together an advisory board for them. And so I said I would. I'd contact some of the people that were functioning from this level. And then on our way back from Tacoma on the airplane, I picked up a Corporate Report magazine. The front page was a picture of Mr. Charlson. And it said, a highly successful engineer, inventor that gets all of his ideas in through intuition. And I said to my wife, Bobby, I got to meet this guy. Now, I'd never met him before. So when we got back, I called. He had a company called Charlin Corporation, which is now incorporated into the Eaton Corporation. I called him, and his secretary answered. And she said, what do you want to talk to him about? I said, I'd like to talk to him about his intuitive capabilities. She said, I'm sorry, he's not available. I must have called 4 or 5 times, talk about staying focused. She wouldn't let me through. About the 6th or 7th time, I remember, I called again, and a guy answered. He says, hello? Very rough voice. And I said, well, my name is Dean Porting. I read this article on the Corporate Report. Well, what do you want? I said, I'd like to talk to you about being an intuitive inventor. Oh, he said, how soon can you get here? I said, I'll be there in 5 minutes. So I got there, and we talked, just like you and I are talking now. He was so interesting because religious-wise, he was a theosophist, you know. It has nothing to do with religion. Other than theosophy also recognizes that we can transcend into another state of consciousness, like the Christ consciousness or cosmic consciousness. But then he said, you know, in my engineering company, when I'd have a little problem, any kind of a problem, he said, now, I'm not skilled in engineering. I don't have a lot of education. But he said, I would always close my eyes, and then I'd ask to get some direction to what to do. And then he said, I would see the answer in my mind's eye in a 3-dimensional picture. And then he said, then I would go to my engineers. He accumulated a few engineers to begin with. And he said, now, these guys were smart, and they had a lot of background and experience. And so I'd go and I'd tell them how we could solve the little problem we were working on. And they said, invariably, they say to me, that's impossible. But I saw it, he said, in my mind. I knew how to do it. And so he said almost every time I'd have to build a prototype for them, and then once I built the prototype for them, then they could carry it on from there. And so we must have talked for maybe 2 hours, our very first visit, and we were on the same wavelength. And that's when he said, I'd like to put a sizable amount, because then he had grown to be extremely wealthy because, he was considered the father of fluid hydraulics and orbital motors and a lot of other stuff. But I'd like to put a sizable amount of money where we can research how thought and consciousness affects all aspects of our lives, our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual nature. And he asked me if I would help him put that together and be the director of his foundation, as you know, Tim, which I did for many, many years. But we had a problem. It wasn't really a problem, but all this stuff is a progressive realization of something. Because at first we thought we could go and teach this stuff to people. And we spent a lot of money trying to put together programs where we could present it in a teachable fashion where people could go within. And that didn't work. We didn't have the means of giving them the experience. You see, there's a big difference between knowing the stuff and experiencing it. And that's where I feel we have really an opportunity here with Chakronicity, is helping each other experience it. Because when we experience it and demonstrate it, then other people can say, wow, now it's not only in a book or some formula on the blackboard, it's an experiential thing. And that once they experience it and then support each other in the experience, it becomes magnified like you can't believe. So anyway, that was my experience with Lynn Charlson, and it was a very valuable one because it's part of my growing also in this state of what I like to call enlightenment. In fact, by the way, Weyerhaeuser actually built a building on their campus in the woods along a river, which they call their meditation center. And they would allow all of their top corporate executives ample time whenever they wanted to go and be in silence and meditate and get direction of how to function in their particular divisions with Weyerhaeuser. And it also broke the stalemate for them.